Salve, people of the universe. My name is Lord Salvator, and today I have a question for you. What would you say is the one thing that defines you as a person? Well, today I'm joined here with Chairey to kind of like answer the question, how can we define ourselves in a world where it gets harder and harder to define yourself? And the most negative effect of this is, of course, that people become less capable of taking care of themselves, especially in younger generations. Now, of course, there are many reasons to this, and we're going to get into that in a moment. But first, I also want to mention I did start writing a book recently, and I've probably released it by now. So if you want to check that out, it's going to be in the description. But for now, let's get back to the cookies in the cookie dough. And we're going to be first mentioning this. There is actually a study that was done a few years ago, I must mention, by an institution in the United Kingdom, which is, the England, Scotland, whatever, where they said that a staggering 84% of 18 to 24-year-olds have admitted they do not know how to change a light bulb. And 74% say they lack the confidence to assemble flat-pack furniture. A further 82% said they lack the confidence to clean their car. Some 79% said they would never attempt to paint a shed, and 75% said they didn't know how to defrost a kitchen freezer. A shocking 73% said they couldn't fix a curtain rail, and 67% said they lacked the ability to put up shelves themselves. Experts believe young people lack basic DIY skills because they live with their parents longer than previous generations and don't need to learn household tasks. The poll found younger people also to be time poor because of studying and work commitments, and as a result have less time for mundane tasks. Now, the first thing I want to touch upon here is the fact that they're talking about, these very basic tasks, really. And let's start with the first claim they make, where they say, which is of course true, which is that generations are now living with their parents longer. Well, in Western civilization, this is especially true, and this is due to multiple factors, of course. Let's start with the most obvious factor, which is that there is severe housing crises going on in the Western world. And what are the reasons for this? Well, the first reason is there's a lack of people who want to work in construction. And why is that? Because we've kind of shifted our gaze. The thing is, we live in a system that's based on industrialization, but the social scene of work, society, basically, has kind of shifted to a thing where it's now you gotta take care of your mental health too and stuff like that. It's the newer generations, but they have no guidance in that. So basically what ends up happening is that generations now live with their parents longer, not because they can't really work in construction, because either they are told that they are meant for more, which makes sense. They don't want to break their backs just to die in a couple of years, basically. They don't want to do that, which makes sense. But also, of course, the other thing, which is there is a growing population, and not every piece of ground can be built upon. And you talk about funding as well. And then you have the other factor, which is very important, which is that because of the way that economy works in a lot of Western countries, especially for example, I live in the Netherlands, I see it here, but I know this is also a thing in America and in the UK as well, which is that very rich people buy a bunch of houses, and then instead of selling those houses, what they end up doing is they put them up for rent. They create rental spaces instead. And the truth is, not being able to buy a house becomes more difficult, because what ends up happening is that because there are less houses to buy, more people are going to rent. And because more people are going to rent and try to be in cities, the rent gets hiked by these people who own these buildings. And this means that people, if you can't increase as a government the general population's wealth, what ends up happening is that people can't afford to rent anymore, which means that it becomes harder and harder. They need higher payments for which they need to be older to begin with nowadays. And they need better skills. They need more diplomas. Someone who doesn't have a diploma nowadays is pretty much screwed when it comes to finding housing, because they cannot really find a good job either way. And so people say, well, you can do something yourself, start your own business. But the truth is that's not as easy as they make it out to be either. Because this entire like idea of self-sufficiency is kind of working against itself. And that's a pattern we're going to see a lot in this video. We're going to see the pattern where trying to get something done, having one intention, might lead to the opposite detrimental effect for different groups. So let's start with the very simple notion, the other simple notion, which is of course like the time poor thing. Like I just said, we do need to learn more and work more in order to get more. So we can't really do those tasks. And that's not to mention the family aspect of it. A lot of people used to learn from their dads, right? But the thing is, nowadays, because of gender stereotyping being seen as a negative thing, we've gone the complete opposite direction. Genders are now kind of non-existent in a way. People are trying to kind of like push the boundaries and make everything gender neutral, everything non-binary basically. But by doing that, you're also removing the roles that they used to have. Whether that's the intended consequence or not, that doesn't matter. It is happening nonetheless. One thing you're seeing is that fathers can no longer teach their sons things because their sons don't want to learn these things because they're told that being the main carer is bad for women, because that means that women are now seen as lesser, because you're the carer, so therefore your woman should follow you. And whilst we don't, I don't think we have to go back to that like very like old patriarchal system that used to exist. We have to admit that nowadays that system is no longer there. But there is always a natural biological function in psychology for men and women. This is a classic example also why transgenderism, for example, can become very problematic, because you are inherent in your psychology within biology. Sure, there may be some statistical noise there where some people diverge from the path, but we can see by the data that there is a general consensus on what is going on. And that's what I'm trying to say. That's the point about that particular argument. So, Chairey, I have a question for you, right?
Okay.
So, have you seen these sort of patterns around you? Because you live in America, right? I live across the water, so
I mean, these patterns are here all the time. I mean, it's within my household. I mean, my brother is basically basically a sex pig who abuses his wife. Doesn't listen to my dad. My dad is also abusive, which is basically a downfall of his father. It's a very it's literally a cycle that America is going through.
yeah, it's the sins of the father get passed down to the son. And I think that we, when a society stops teaching people good morals, right, and good functions and efficiency and logic, right, when society stops helping people as a whole, when there's no government interference in like a direction, that's when these problems occur, because there are always going to be those few people who are bad and they will pass it down to their sons. But if there's no interference from the outside, it's just going to be more and more people who are in that category, right? Because there's nothing that pulls society back in that regard. I think that like one very thing that I talk about quite a lot is the Nietzsche concept, right? Where Friedrich Nietzsche, he said God is dead and we have killed him, which is basically saying, okay, well, where do morals come from now? When in Europe, in the 1800s, 1700s, 1800s, 1900s, those years, the transformative period, when people lost religion as a main source of focus for morality, what took over? Well, nothing really. When there is no goal in a society, when there is no ultimate consensus on where we're going, you get these problems because you don't have any way to guide people anywhere, because there is no place to guide them to, basically. So, like, what is a good man? Like, it used to be pretty straightforward back in those days, right? What is a good man? It means like, oh, be pious, right? Be don't be degenerate, right? Don't go having sex with everyone all the time. Don't overindulge yourself. Don't be greedy. But nowadays we don't have those restraints anymore, and I think that that's the biggest issue. When you don't have restraints from an authoritarian perspective, it yes, it brings some freedom into expression, but it also brings the danger of, well, what do we do now? Well, how do we handle morals now? I do believe that morals can exist without a religion. I truly know that. I think that I know that that's the case. But I, the question is, who's going to supply those morals and how? And why haven't we done it yet as societies, right? So, what would you suggest, like, would be a good thing in America, right? So, what would you think the American government would have to do in order to reinstitute good morals in their youth?
Well, for me, like a good start will be basically rehashing the entire education system because it's extremely faulty at the moment. Right now, it's focusing on greed instead of actual people's education. That any kid that comes home or just mesmerized by the wokeness of society instead of actually improving themselves.
Yeah, no, you're completely right with that. I think that I do also think that the politicization, I don't know, that one
I guess
word,
that's one way. That's one way to say it.
the politicalization of um the education systems is really bad, and I mean that from all sides. Even like gemtocracy, right? I think that like gemtocratic values should be taught by parents and stuff. I've been very clear on this. For example, I don't ever want politics. I want them to see all political ideas, right? No censorship. I don't want them to just be like told, oh, this is a bad political thought. I need them to be explained why certain things are bad, but not why a political idea is bad, for example, right? Because that's people. I think children need to be opened to this world of truth.
Yeah, because I agree on that. Because it's like we all like if you look into a lot of the political parties and all that stuff, at the end of the day, you come to the conclusion we all want a very similar thing. It's just the direction that we all are taking. It's not the direction that each of us wants to take with it. And that's the problem here. We're not working together, we're working against each other, even though we're working for the exact same goal.
Yeah, I think the problem with that is also like, there's so many topics that people keep rehashing. Like it's like, oh, it's racism, it's transphobia, it's guns, it's and like yes, these things are problematic, but because we're talking about these things all the time now, there's barely any space for the other things, right? Like for example, this thing that we're talking about right now, which is the self-sufficiency of youth, right? Like you don't hear people talk about this all the time passionately on the internet like they do about those other topics, right? That's
Yeah.
but that's a very sad thing when you think about it, because that basically shows that people would feel more comfortable being a victim and antagonizing others rather than to say, okay, what can I do about my situation, and what can we do as a collective about the lack of uh, capacity and capability of our youth. So the goals are all completely like we like you said, I think we deep down we all have like the goals, right? Like those goals that are like pretty similar, like, oh, I want a healthy family, right? I want to keep my family healthy. I want to be able to live. I want to be able to not choke on things. Well, maybe some people do like choking, but the point is, like, overall the general consensus is that people don't like choking. So uh, it's you know what I'm saying though.
Yeah, I mean, I get what you're saying, and it's just like, sadly, it's just like nowadays, instead of like realizing that everyone wants to go and argue with each other, and it's like at the end of the day, what does that do? It's like even if, like, say for instance, there was a victory in this with any of these political groups, there's going to be another fight soon after because you're there's always going to be something wrong with someone else's judgment towards towards someone else's. It is never going to change.
I think,
It feels like
yeah,
it
no, I
anyways.
agree, and I think that in a way you're right, but I think that what needs to change is the framework. I don't think we can change the pattern or the cycle of, like, because because there's always going to be new rules that will have to be made, and new information will come to light, and new realizations, through the ages. But I think if we implement a system that's more adaptable, rather than this idea of like, for example, the American amendments, right? Like the constitutional rights.
Mm-hmm.
I get why they're there, but to say that they can never change ever, that means that you're going to stagnate eventually. You're going to be stuck in a certain period of time's thinking. And, like I said, not like you should be very careful with what you change and what you remove and what you add. But at the same time, you got to ask yourself, is it really good to be stuck in the same ideas in a world that's ever changing, with new information coming to light every day? Is it really good to follow the same old rules forever?
Well, obviously not, because we see the consequences of that right now.
I mean, wasn't it like a constitutional thing where like all men are equal, right? That's like one of the constitutional rights, I think, of the
Yes.
American thing. So if we were to use the logic of some things should never change, I mean, these things should never change, what about the things that were there before that? What about the general consensus before that slavery was okay? Like, what about that? Like, slavery was widely accepted and even expected before those times, right? And even during those
Mm-hmm.
times, they were contentious. So, are you going to say that that was all right? Because that was the way it used to be. Do you want to go back to that as well? Like, do we not need positive change? That's what I'm asking. It's because I
I mean,
think, yeah,
no, you gone. Sorry, I didn't
yeah,
mean
no,
to.
no. I think that it's good to have like a stability, but I think that stability doesn't mean being stagnant. I think it means being, in a way, stability needs movement, right? It's kind of like when you're like standing on a pole with one foot. If you do that, it's better to like kind of slightly move so that you don't fall over. It's,
Yeah, like move your hands a little bit.
yeah, you gotta like realign with the waves around you. And I think that that's what we need to get back into the system. And when we're talking about the system, and when we're talking about getting those values realigned, we're also talking about, of course, the different values for the different demographics. Because, of course, someone who has a different religion or a different culture is not going to have the same values as another. Now, I have made several comments on multiculturalism and how I believe it doesn't really work in a lot of instances. I don't think every culture works together. I do think it's important to also talk about the more introspective culture. Basically, what I'm saying with this is we're talking about the values of different like minorities that are basically deemed as um, the community minorities that are um, uh, what's that word again that people use, marginalized, or like things like that. So first thing we're going to touch on is, of course, the very commonly discussed group, which is, of course, the African Americans, right? So I think that the main issue with the African American community is that they're being torn between two sides, which is the racist conservatives, which are the far right, and the far leftists, which are the people who say that everything is racist and who want just reparations and stuff like that. I think that the community is being torn apart in a way. I don't know if you agree with the statement, Cherry, and I don't know uh, if you can actually. Do you witness this in your community? Basically, do you witness this as well?
I would say, like, overall, it just feels a little bit very isolated in general, because it's like, it's either you're in the hood and you're dealing with the hood rats and dealing with guns and getting about to get shot and stuff like that, or you deal with this race stuff where everyone makes more issues about your skin color than you do.
Yeah, so it's kind of like they're basically offended for you. Is that like the idea?
Yeah, and then it's just like a lot of like black people who hasn't actually experienced what it's actually meant to be black. like they live very comfortable, are acting like they have dealt with the worst in their life and they're the one protesting. But yet the ones who actually are dealing with the hard life are still are the ones that's sitting at home or is frustrated at this mess, because it's like these young people are very ignorant of what it I mean about our actual culture. And instead it feels more selfish. Instead it's just it feels more like it's for greed rather than actual for rights.
Yeah, so I mean, you had of course like the Black Lives Matter organization, specifically the organization we're talking about here, which basically stole a lot of money from people and then just left and dissolved. Like that was actually a thing that happened, you know.
I mean, I always consider the Black Lives Movement just no different from the church. It's just like a lot of these people are taking advantage of people's ignorance and wanting to get out of the system. And they are just getting people to protest over nothing and making millions off of it while we're still struggling and dealing with the same issues that we're fighting, that we were trying to fight for.
Yes, yes, exactly. That's something I also see a lot of, from what I can see at least. You know, I have of course a limited view because it's very different when you see things online than if you probably see them in real life, I would imagine. But what I am seeing from across the water is that in America especially, there is this kind of um this thing where like the victim identity is basically the opposite of a victim, right? The victim kind of becomes an oppressor in the sense that like they they don't really care about getting their goals done by. So, for example, like we talked about this yesterday. Actually, we talked about Nelson Mandela, who was a very true activist who fought apartheid, which is basically segregation in South Africa, and he was very non-violent about it. And he did a lot more than these other people do nowadays. And I think that the virtue signaling, like these people haven't spent years in prison, right? These people haven't spent years in enslavement. These people haven't spent years in these issues. And then the ones that actually are, like those think that these people represent them because that's the way they pose themselves. But it's like the classic wolf in sheep's clothing story, you know, like the just because someone is a part of a demographic, and I've said this many times, does not mean that they become the spokesperson for that demographic, right? Being part of
Yes.
a demographic does not make you the expert on the demographic.
Yeah,
Because,
because usually the loud ones are the ones that is screwing everyone over, whereas the quiet ones are the ones that is actually more knowledgeable and has a better intuition on what is actually going on.
yeah, and that is like the thing, because um, when I was talking about the what was I saying earlier? The
Mandela thing, I guess. I don't know.
no, like like right before you said what you just said, I was talking about the anyway. That's just if I remember,
Sorry.
I'll get back to it. No, it's okay. It's just if I remember, I'll get back to it. But the main point that I'm trying to make here is, yes, the people, you know, the wolf in sheep's clothing story, right? The people who are knowledgeable are often pushed into the background because they think that these people represent them, because these people look powerful. But the thing is, I have found, especially like in my students, you know, because I'm a teacher, right? So like in my students, I see a lot. The ones who are more quiet are usually the more capable ones. And the reason why I found, and this is very interesting, it's a very interesting psychological thing. But the reason why I think this is the case is because when someone is more thinking, they don't want to say everything they're thinking because they're like, well, my words can have an effect, right? And they're like, well, what if I'm wrong? They question themselves, so they are more knowledgeable about things because they actually question the things. Whereas someone who is really convinced, and you kind of harken back to what I said earlier about the amendments, for example, like the trying to be stable and trying to have like a firm thought. It's like this thing where like politicians can either be flip-floppity, like they change their perspective every single day, or they can go the opposite way, which is like to never change any idea, right? And that's like the danger of it. If you never change an idea, then you might seem strong for your idea, but that also means that you could get stuck in this false idea that even when new information is available, that would actually help you achieve your goals more. But because you're so stuck to those old methods, you're kind of like doing the same thing. It's kind of like like you mentioned the church earlier. Yes, it's true. In a way, fighting against authoritarianism can make someone authoritarian. And I think that this is a concept that's very widely known, but not widely acknowledged amongst these groups themselves, right?
Exactly. And it's just like we see it. It's just like if like for instance, if like the conservative party were to take over, it's just like now black people will have to go out of their way to go and fight against that because now we're gonna deal with a bunch of racism and then the cycle repeats. Now white people have to go and deal with that because they might not like white people black people. You see the
Yeah.
problem here.
So, for example, like we talked about like yesterday, like with the Disney thing, right? About like how they ruined the entire Disney franchise, basically.
Yeah, and they going back on circle with Snow White with the 7 diversity
Yeah, yeah,
quota.
yeah, exactly. Like,
and
it's
then and then the Snow White actress. She's a big B.
yeah, yeah, no, exactly. She's like ruining the advertising as well. It's actually kind of funny in a way. And this is the one thing that's really funny because that's the one like conservative quote I do find really hilarious because it's true, which is that they say the left eats itself. This is like a perfect example of that,
I mean,
basically.
it kind of is. It's like I said yesterday. Disney got big off Snow White. They're ending off Snow White.
Yeah,
Unless they cancel this movie, they really should cancel this movie.
yeah. Just stop at this point. Just stop. You know, just
Stop, cancel the movie, cancel all the other movies, take your loss, and get fix your shit.
go back to the drawing board, right? But like
Everyone knows that you're falling, so stop.
yeah, so like I said, like the problem is like I say the same thing you said about like those conservative things. Like, you know, when they hired all those diversity people, right, for like the writers' rooms and stuff, oh, like LGBT people, right, and colored people, and I don't know, fucking grass. I don't know. I'm just naming anything at this point. You know, there's not enough grass in office.
Man, just imagine like a speck of glass with some glasses on, just sitting on a desk, just telling everyone how to do things.
I bet they would make better content.
For real.
Honestly, no, but you know, and then you know, because they're doing it basically only focusing on the diversity quota, they're not looking at the quality of the writers. But what this does is this also reaffirms the stereotype that these people can't write for shit, right? So it's like, oh, these diverse people, look, they're failing because no one likes this anymore because it's garbage. Well, maybe that's because you've been focusing on people who produce garbage rather than people who produce quality. And
I mean,
you know,
go on.
It's not like it doesn't mean that like just because you're colored or because you're LGBT, whatever, right? That doesn't have anything to do with your creative process. But when that becomes the priority, you're no longer looking at the best quality, and therefore it reaffirms these CEOs' ideas. Oh, that are racist, like, oh, these people, they can't write for shit. Look at we're tanking our numbers. They're terrible. You know, it's
I mean, and it also reinforces the public view. Like, think of a good example. Like, remember, like the first e-girl e-sport team for like League of Legends.
yeah,
After they flunk, there has never been a e-girl team like that ever since. Because people do not believe in girls can play video games, and it's kind of like, and like that's like an example in a different media. Look at what's happening right now with like black people in writing and like any other form of like demographic. They are treated the same way. We treat it like we can't write for shit because they're hiring the bad actors.
yeah, exactly. And so this is something I also wanted to mention. So, you know, my dad is Indonesian, right? My dad's from Indonesia. So when people often see like anything as racist, right, on one side of the aisle at least, and uh, one thing I've noticed is that like the way I've dealt with, I've dealt with racism, but I try to deal with it in a way that's kind of like comedic almost, right? And I think that that's like the problem with what we're dealing with nowadays. It's the if you can't if you can't be tolerant of intolerance, then you're letting intolerance win.
Yeah, because what's going to end up happening is that you're not progressing in your feet. Who cares if this person doesn't like your skin? Why does that matter? You don't like this person, so move on from them.
Yes,
Go away.
I think the one thing we need to start accepting, and I think that this goes for humanity as a whole, we need to start accepting that good changes can't be enforced instantly. Like same with like the fact that I'm a vegan, right? I don't expect everyone in the world to become vegan right now. That just doesn't make any sense. It's not how the world works. There's too many factors at play. And I think the same thing goes with like what they did with slavery. Slavery didn't like end in one full sweep, you know? And I think the same goes with all other things that are, virtuous and good and stuff like that, right? I think the only way to really end these things is not by fighting them with fire, but fighting them with water, cooling them down, you know?
Yeah, because it's like what's happening is that we're fighting each other, and it's like it's making other people who don't even have anything to do with your protest to go and get into it too because they're pissed off that you're ruining their shit. You're killing people.
Did you,
It murder is go on.
like during the Black Lives Matter protests, right, and the Antifa
Mm-hmm.
protests, like have you heard about like that thing that happened with that Asian man?
No, I have not. Can
So
you
there was
clarify?
an Asian man who ran a store, and I'm not certain I'm getting every detail right, but I'm pretty sure that this is very well known, so you can probably look it up. But there was this Asian man, and like his entire store basically got robbed and burned down by Black Lives Matter protesters, and these people are like seemingly for the minorities, but then like this man, just his entire life basically just went up in flames and ruined, and it's like Jesus, right?
Look at people need to take back and look back in the day when black people actually did fought for our rights. Back then they did not fight through like fighting, and if they did, it wasn't through their choice. They fought through peace. They fought by actually caring about themselves. They fought like that.
It's kind of
Nowadays,
yeah.
go on. We're
Oh,
doing the you do. You go what
okay,
you was about
okay.
to say.
Yeah, no, I mean, I was just gonna mention like that what you're describing is exactly like the Rosa Parks thing, you know, like the just don't get up when you're on the bus. Like that's a form of protest, right? That's a real form of protest, I think, rather than burning random buildings to the ground.
Yeah, because like you're fighting against the thing that is a problem. You're not doing something that has because like what is you're burning out a random building. That's only affecting that business. That's not affecting anybody else except make you look bad. If anything, it actually helps the cities nowadays because like people don't realize that they want to rebuild and all that shit. They don't want all these old buildings and all these small business owners owning shit. So they're doing a favor.
Yes, that also reminds me. What you just said reminds me of like this funny thing, which is like, did you see? You know who Justin Trudeau is, right?
Yes.
Canadian. Yeah,
Yeah, the that dude.
yeah. So Canada has become casually just more and more communist over the last few years. But it becomes even more ridiculous when you look at the way that Justin Trudeau, like the way he rules. Because, okay, he tweeted, right? He tweeted a picture of him at like one of these like walks, right? These protest
Nice.
walks. And he had like a headline that said, "Together we can try to fix this." And it's like, dude, you're the guy in charge. You can fix this. You're supposed to fix this. It's supposed to be up to you. Are you not the one leading your nation? And he's like, it's like,
He's not even. He doesn't even have the senile excuse like Joe Biden. Like the dude literally is senile. We understand why you can't do shit. Why can't you do anything? You're fucking young.
like with Joe Biden, it's just sad. Like at this point, I don't even want to laugh at Joe Biden anymore because it's just sad. It's just an old man who probably is being guided by other people to say certain things and stuff. I don't think he really knows what's going on most of the time
The
anymore.
dude is basically dead.
It's sad, you know. And like, yeah, he's done horrible things, and he might be a little bit of a child sniffer, but like besides that, he hasn't really, you know, done anything that would make him worse than other politicians, if you get what I'm saying.
Yes.
The only thing that he does badly is rule his country, but that's because he's not in charge anymore, really, when you think about it. It's the other
Yeah,
people around him.
if he was like in his prime, I don't think he would want to be. I don't even think he would want to run this country that old.
Yeah, no, exactly. Like the guy has no idea what's going on. Some of the sometimes he's talking to he might be schizophrenic or something because like sometimes he's just talking to the air. He stuck his head out into the air and stuff, right?
He has dementia probably, and they just not saying it.
Yeah, but like leave the old man alone. Like
He has dementia. Put him in retirement.
this is the thing, right?
Yes.
I don't like the Democrats. I don't like the Conservatives. I don't like either parties really that much. But please, for the love of sanity, give this man some peace. And for all I care, put another Democrat up there. But at least just fucking get that guy out of there.
Didn't like decades ago they had more common sense when they go and impeach a president and actually replace the president? What happened to that? Like, why can't you just replace him? He's old. He doesn't know where he's at. Replace the fuck out of him. It's like right now it's kind of too late because it's like the election's coming up soon.
Yeah.
But like they could have been done that.
Yeah, and also that kind of also harkens back to something I said to you the other day, which is the thing with and also with the amendment thing basically that we said, which is of course we're going to be stuck as a nation. Like America's going to be stuck as a nation because they only have older people in charge, right? They have mostly older people in Congress. That means that like the new world that the youth is trying to build is actively going against that, and it's problematic.
And the thing is like it's hard to really do damage control because even if we were to go and get younger people to go in charge, we already see it. Like we dumb our youth so down that even if we get a youth as a president right now, it's gonna take years before we can get the proper education to get. Before it can get back to what it was decades ago because our young people is admittedly stupid.
Yeah, agreed. And on that, we can end this thing. We started with young people not knowing how to do things, and we ended on young people being stupid. So, great.
We learned nothing.
We learned nothing today. We just came back to the same conclusion. I hope someone else here learned something, or at least you brought something to the attention. Anyway, thank you all for watching this. Please subscribe, leave a like, and also remember to check out my book if you want to, if you're interested in philosophy. It's called Nothing Happened. It's a philosophical take on the balance between nihilism and progress. And all hail to the rebel.